Try this for a second. Close your eyes. No phone in your pocket, no language in your head, no memory of yesterday, no plan for tomorrow. You're squatting beside a small fire somewhere in Africa, 300,000 years back. The flames are dying down. A puff of smoke drifts over from the wrong kind of branch. You breathe it in without meaning to, and something inside you flips. One thought, loud and unmistakable. Do that again. That's the actual starting point of this story, because from that moment on, humans have been chasing that exact sensation through every society we've ever built. So forget, is smoking bad for you? That's not the interesting question. The real question is, why did our species ever start pulling smoke into its lungs in the first place? Go back a million years to Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa. Archaeologists pulled ash residue out of a sheltered chamber there, not the leftovers of a wildfire. Not a fluke. This was fire that had been kept alive and used again and again, night after night. And the species doing it wasn't us. It was Homo erectus. Smaller skull, heavier brow ridge, no writing, no language as we'd recognize it. But they had fire, and they sat around it constantly. Here's the part people skip over. Fire doesn't only give off heat and light. Burning plant matter releases a cocktail of chemicals, alkaloids, terpenes, all kinds of volatile compounds that ride along in the smoke and interact directly with the human nervous system once inhaled. Most are neutral. A few aren't. A few are strongly psychoactive. Early humans weren't picking campsites because of the plants growing nearby. They picked them for cover, water, and safety. Which means every so often, without anyone choosing it, the wood feeding the fire came from something their brains had never been exposed to before. The very first time it happened, nobody had a framework for it. Someone just felt off, lighter, strange, maybe unsettled. Probably both at once, with zero idea why. But remember, these weren't primitive versions of us. They were us, just without generations of accumulated knowledge behind them. They still noticed patterns. They still connected cause to effect. So somewhere around some fire, someone put it together. This plant, this smoke, this feeling. Not a plan, not a decision, just a curious mind noticing an accident. And that noticing might be one of the single most consequential moments in our species' history. There's a piece of this that almost never makes it out of academic journals. Fire didn't just keep us warm and safe. It rewired human sleep itself. Before fire, our ancestors slept the way every other primate does, up in the trees, in short, broken stretches, half alert the entire time. Deep sleep was a risk you couldn't afford. Something could always be creeping up on you. Then fire showed up. With flames burning at the perimeter of camp, predators kept their distance. The dark, once genuinely deadly, became something you could manage. For the first time in our evolutionary story, a human being could stretch out on the ground and actually let go. And that changed our biology. Modern humans sleep less, in raw hours, than almost any other primate. Chimpanzees get roughly 10 hours, orangutans around 11, we average 7 to 8. But the quality is on a totally different level. We spend a dramatically larger share of that time in REM sleep, the phase tied to memory consolidation, emotional processing, and vivid, immersive dreaming. Researchers at Harvard have floated the idea that fire is what made this shift possible. Once sleeping on the ground stopped being dangerous, evolution could afford to optimize for depth of sleep rather than sheer duration. Here's where the threads start to connect. REM sleep is, neurologically speaking, an altered state. Your brain in REM barely resembles your waking brain. Certain regions go dark, others fire in patterns you never see while conscious. Time stops tracking normally. You live through vivid, emotionally intense experiences that feel completely real in the moment. So the people gathered around those fires weren't only occasionally inhaling something psychoactive by accident. Every single night, they were also dropping into the deepest altered states their nervous systems were capable of producing. States that fire itself had made possible in the first place. Dreaming was, in a sense, the very first altered state, and fire is what unlocked it. When those same people woke up from an intense, emotionally raw dream and then sat back down next to that same fire, breathing in smoke that shifted their perception again, the two experiences would have felt connected. Not identical, but related. Both happened at the edge of the firelight. Both left behind the sense that something significant had just occurred, even if they couldn't name what. Fire was the bridge linking those two worlds. So what was actually triggering those first waking, altered experiences? The answer has been sitting inside your skull the whole time. Your brain runs something called the endocannabinoid system. It regulates mood, memory, appetite, and your stress response. It's core to how your body functions day to day. That system is built on receptors, and those receptors respond to cannabinoids. Here's the detail that should catch you off guard. Those receptors didn't evolve because of cannabis. They evolved for entirely internal, unrelated reasons. Cannabis just happens to produce compounds that slot into them almost perfectly. And cannabis, remember, grows wild across huge stretches of Africa, Asia, and Europe. So the first time a human inhaled smoke from burning cannabis, their brain wasn't confused by it. It recognized it. The receptors were already sitting there, waiting. The compound simply switched them on in a way that was, to put it mildly, impossible to ignore. Memorable enough to stick with you. Memorable enough to seek out again. This isn't a dramatized retelling for effect. It's a real hypothesis taken seriously across several research fields. Given where early humans were living, exposure to psychoactive smoke wasn't some rare possibility. It was close to unavoidable. The real question isn't whether it happened. It's when people started doing it on purpose. We do have a fairly concrete answer for intentional use. A burial site high in a mountain range, dated to roughly 500 BCE. Wooden braziers were found there, shallow bowls set on legs, built to hold heated stones, along with residue from cannabis plants carrying unusually high THC concentrations. This wasn't rope-grade hemp or industrial fiber. Someone had deliberately chosen the more potent strain and placed it at a burial ritual on purpose, with enough knowledge of what they were doing to select for strength specifically. Modern chemical testing confirmed exactly what the residue was. This is currently the oldest direct physical evidence we have of intentional smoking. But here's the catch with that statement. Physical evidence needs something physical to survive. Plant fiber, wooden pipes, leather pouches, all of it breaks down. Give it a few centuries in ordinary soil, and it's gone. So what we dig up isn't a record of everything that happened. It's only the fraction that happened to survive. Those are very different things. When we say the oldest evidence is 2,500 years old, what we actually mean is the oldest evidence that lasted long enough for someone to find it. The behavior itself is almost certainly far older than that. How much older? Try 12,000 years in Utah. In the Great Salt Lake Desert, archaeologists uncovered a hearth roughly 12,000 years old, containing seeds from a wild tobacco species native to North America. Not scattered randomly, but clustered in a way that points to deliberate placement. No pipes, no pottery, just tobacco seeds sitting in an ancient fire. That single find pushes back intentional tobacco use by thousands of years compared to earlier estimates, and it raises a question that's hard to unask once you hear it. If people in North America were putting tobacco seeds into fires 12,000 years ago, what were people on every other continent doing with their local psychoactive plants at the same moment in time? Because 12,000 years ago, humans were already spread across sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, Europe, and Australia. Different plants everywhere, but the same brain running the show. Herodotus, a Greek historian writing in the 5th century BCE, traveled extensively and wrote down what he witnessed. For roughly 2,000 years afterward, scholars read him with polite skepticism. Interesting anecdotes, probably exaggerated for effect. One of those anecdotes concerned the Scythians. He described them setting up small enclosed tents, heating stones until they glowed, throwing hemp seeds onto the hot stones, and sitting inside inhaling the resulting smoke. He wrote that they cried out with pleasure. For centuries, historians assumed he'd embellished. Maybe it was really just a steam bath and he'd dressed it up. Then, archaeologists excavated Scythian burial mounds and found bronze braziers, heated stones, and hemp residue, exactly what Herodotus had described. He hadn't exaggerated at all. If anything, he'd understated it. He watched a group of Scythians get intensely high inside a hemp smoke tent and reported it about as faithfully as anyone could. And for 2,000 years, people assumed he'd gotten it wrong. The takeaway isn't really about Herodotus. It's about how much of the ancient world we still misjudge, and how often the things we're confident about turn out to be backwards. Tobacco is native to the Americas, meaning that before 1492, no one in the Old World had ever encountered it. Within weeks of arriving, Columbus noted in his journal that the local people he met carried small burning bundles, inhaling the smoke and releasing it through the nose and mouth. His crew found it bizarre. His crew also picked up the habit within weeks. Of course they did. But tobacco use in the Americas long predates 1492. Residue analysis from ancient pipes puts it back at least 3,500 years, and some researchers looking at cultivation patterns in the Amazon basin argue for 10,000 years or more. What gets erased almost entirely in the retelling? Tobacco in ancient America wasn't recreational at all. It was sacred. It was understood as a channel to the spirit world, smoke as a living messenger, carrying prayers upward and bringing visions back down. Blowing smoke onto someone was a form of blessing. A shaman smoking wasn't relaxing. He was performing serious, weighty work. Tobacco was handled with the kind of reverence you reserve for something you consider both genuinely powerful and genuinely dangerous. The image of smoking a cigarette while waiting for a bus? That's a European invention, and a fairly recent one at that, one that needed specific industrial machinery to even become physically possible. The Ebers Papyrus, from ancient Egypt around 1550 BCE, is one of the oldest medical documents ever discovered. It describes deliberately inhaling smoke from particular heated herbs as a treatment for throat and respiratory ailments. To modern ears, that sounds strange. To the Egyptians, it was perfectly logical. If a plant carries therapeutic compounds and the lungs are the point of entry, smoke is a direct delivery mechanism. The lungs absorb it efficiently. Functionally, you're building an inhaler. We still rely on the same underlying principle today. Asthma inhalers and anesthetic gases both work this way. The delivery method survived. The burning mostly didn't. Ancient Indian Ayurvedic medicine, over 3,000 years old, describes a formal technique called dhumapana, literally smoke drinking. Specific plants, specific ailments, specific preparation methods. Nothing improvised about it. A codified medical practice, refined over centuries, and versions of it show up independently across ancient Greece, China, Mesopotamia, and India. In essentially every early documented civilization, there's evidence of deliberate, therapeutic smoke inhalation, not as habit or addiction, but as medicine. In a world without surgery, without antibiotics, without most of what we'd recognize as healthcare, a treatment that sometimes worked was worth an enormous amount. Humans evolved as group animals. Trust, coordination, moving as a unit. None of that was optional. It was survival. Modern neuroscience has found something striking. Shared rituals actually synchronize neural activity between the people participating in them. They measurably increase trust and deepen a sense of shared identity, biochemically, not just symbolically. When a group of early humans sat together in an enclosed space and collectively slid into an altered state through shared smoke, something bigger than individual brain chemistry was happening. The group was bonding in a way that would have been extremely difficult to produce through any other means available to them at the time. Shared intense experience creates a distinct kind of connection, mutual vulnerability, mutual trust, an identity that stretches past the individual. Anyone who's been through something hard alongside other people already understands this instinctively. The ritual smoke circle wasn't just a social gathering. It was infrastructure. It was how you built the kind of trust that let you walk into dangerous situations with other people and genuinely believe they wouldn't abandon you. That function is probably the oldest of all the ones discussed here, older than the medicinal use, older than the spiritual use, because group cohesion was a survival requirement before either of those existed. Within decades of 1492, tobacco had spread across the Old World. Within a century, it was a global trade good, What indigenous Americans had folded into a carefully managed, deeply ritualized practice over thousands of years, European hands turned into a mass commodity in under 4 centuries. By the early 20th century, industrial cigarette manufacturing made tobacco cheaper, more convenient, and more addictive than anything that had come before it. Specific compounds were added deliberately to speed up nicotine absorption and its clearance from the body, not an accidental discovery of the addiction cycle, but an engineered one. Same plant, same basic physical act, a completely different relationship to it. A shaman choosing a potent cannabis strain and placing it on heated stones at a burial, connecting the living to the dead through shared smoke, has almost nothing in common with a tobacco executive in 1960 signing off on a marketing campaign aimed at kids. Both involve smoke. Practically nothing else lines up. So when did it actually start? Honestly, we're still figuring that out. The physical evidence takes us back 12,000 years with real confidence. Exposure to psychoactive smoke from natural fires almost certainly goes back much further, possibly to the first sustained use of controlled fire, roughly 1 million years ago. What we do know for sure, by the time any human civilization had developed writing, smoking was already ancient, already ritualized, already woven into medicine, spirituality, and social bonding in ways that imply centuries, if not millennia, of practice before anyone thought to record it. The behavior predates agriculture. It predates pottery. It predates every civilization you've ever studied in school. And underneath all of it, the drive to seek out altered states, to step across the line between ordinary experience and something that feels bigger than ordinary, looks less like a glitch and more like a genuine feature of human cognition. Ronald Siegel, a psychopharmacologist at UCLA, proposed that the pursuit of altered consciousness functions essentially as a fourth biological drive, alongside hunger, thirst, and sex. And it's not only humans. Elephants seek out fermented fruit. Reindeer in Siberia eat psychedelic mushrooms and then drink the urine of other reindeer that ate them first because the active compounds pass through intact. Reindeer running drug recycling operations in Siberia. If this drive is that old, that widespread, that consistent across species, treating it as some kind of aberration doesn't hold up. Our ancestors didn't treat it that way. They built structures around it. Rituals, restrictions, meaning. They took something powerful and gave it a framework that made it survivable. And then, somewhere along the way, we stripped that framework away. Next time you're standing near a bonfire and that smell hits you, notice what happens. Something old stirs. Your nervous system is reading a signal it's been processing for 100,000 years. A signal that once meant warmth, safety, community. The edge of a world that was trying to kill you, made briefly survivable by fire. The smoke hasn't changed. What changed is what we chose to do with it. And that long chain of choices, from the shaman's tent to the cigarette factory, is the entire distance between something that helped make us human and something that quietly started killing us. Same fire, completely different story.